The desert at night feels like another world entirely. As the last traces of sunlight fade over the distant Sierra Nevada, the landscape turns into a vast ocean of shadow and silence. The air cools quickly, wrapping itself around the dry earth like a whisper. Every sound is amplified: the faint rustle of wind against the sagebrush, the distant call of a coyote, the gentle shifting of sand beneath invisible movement. Overhead, the sky stretches infinitely wide, filled with more stars than one can count, so dense and alive that it almost feels as if the heavens themselves are breathing. Beneath this cosmic ceiling, time seems to slow down, and for a moment, you can imagine that you are the only being awake in a sleeping world. It is here, in this stillness, that the story begins. A story of light and shadow, of questions whispered across decades, and of a mystery that refuses to fade. The Nevada desert, so unassuming and barren by day, transforms under the night sky into a stage for the unexplainable. For generations, travelers, wanderers, and locals have gazed into these same skies and witnessed something that defies logic: strange lights dancing far above the horizon, appearing and disappearing without sound, sometimes in patterns, sometimes alone, always elusive. The first witnesses may have thought them to be lanterns, falling stars, or reflections from distant towns. But those who stayed to watch longer often reported something different: movements too deliberate, changes in color too quick, and an intelligence that felt aware. As the narrator's voice guides you deeper into this calm, you begin to sense what countless people have felt before: the awareness that in the desert's silence, every flicker of light carries meaning. Out here, surrounded by miles of nothing, the mind becomes sharper. The human eye, freed from city glare, notices everything: the way one star pulses slightly different from another, the faint shimmer near the horizon, the subtle glow that seems to drift where no aircraft could possibly fly. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is everything. This uncertainty, this space between knowing and wondering, is where mystery lives. The desert is no stranger to mystery. Its isolation has preserved both ancient stories and modern secrets. Long before radar towers and restricted airspace, these lands were sacred to indigenous tribes who told stories of spirits and celestial beings that descended from the night sky. They spoke of lights that brought messages or warnings, sometimes blessings, sometimes omens. These were not tales of fear, but of reverence, for the desert was, and remains, a place of connection between Earth and the beyond. When settlers arrived centuries later, they too felt the strange allure of the landscape. Prospectors and travelers camped under the same stars and wrote in their journals about wandering flames, or floating orbs, that followed them along the trails. Even then, the desert seemed to hold something otherworldly, something that watched silently from above. As decades passed, technology changed, but the mystery persisted. Pilots, soldiers, and scientists would come to this land for their own purposes, building runways and testing engines, charting the sky with precision instruments. Yet even with all their data, their maps, and their logic, there remained events they could not account for: lights that appeared where no aircraft should be, movements that defied their calculations. And so, a question began to form, quietly but persistently: are these lights born of the earth, or do they come from somewhere far beyond it? The Nevada desert holds this question like a secret, vast, patient, unbothered by time. When the wind moves across the open flats, it carries echoes of those who once looked up and wondered. Perhaps it carries your thoughts too, as you lie back beneath the stars and feel the pull of that endless sky. The desert invites stillness, but within that stillness, it also invites curiosity. For in the soft glow of the stars, amid the quiet rhythm of your own breathing, you might notice it, a faint shimmer far off in the distance, moving slowly against the backdrop of eternity. It flickers once, then twice, steady and deliberate. It doesn't blink like a plane, nor drift like a satellite. It hovers, waiting, watching. And just when your mind begins to question whether it's real, it vanishes, as if it were never there at all. This is where countless stories have begun. In the desert beneath the stars. In the stillness where human imagination meets the unknown. The lights over Nevada have been seen for generations, yet their nature remains as elusive as the night wind. Some say they are the echoes of secret tests. Others believe they are glimpses of something greater, a quiet presence observing us from above. But for now, as the vast sky stretches overhead, one truth remains. In the Nevada desert, the line between reality and mystery is as thin as the horizon itself. And as we begin this journey together, we step into that space, calm, curious, and ready to listen to what the desert might reveal. Long before the Nevada desert became synonymous with secret bases and government cover-ups, it was already home to stories of strange lights that drifted across its endless horizons. The earliest known accounts date back to the late 19th century, when miners, prospectors, and railroad workers traveled through the desolate basins of Tonopah, Pioche, and Goldfield. In their journals and letters, they wrote of wandering lanterns that hovered in the distance, silent, glowing orbs that seemed to follow the movement of men and mules through the valleys. Many dismissed them as tricks of heat and dust, or as the glow of campfires seen through waves of desert mirage. But some described details too precise to ignore. Lights that ascended vertically, darted sideways, and vanished instantly, behavior no lantern or torch could ever imitate. By the early 1900s, small Nevada newspapers began recording such reports more frequently. In the Tonopah Daily Bonanza and the Ely Record, scattered paragraphs mentioned mysterious fires in the sky, witnessed by travelers or night guards near mining operations. One article from 1909 spoke of a ball of light that hovered over the desert floor before rising rapidly into the clouds, leaving no smoke or trail. Others spoke of silent flashes that illuminated the sagebrush plains for seconds before fading back into darkness. Most readers likely shrugged them off, assuming misidentification or exaggeration. After all, in a place where exhaustion, solitude, and harsh conditions were constant companions, it was easy to believe the desert played tricks on tired eyes. Yet, these quiet, early accounts planted the first seeds of something larger, a mystery that would only grow with time. By the 1940s, as aviation advanced and World War II changed the skies forever, reports of strange lights began to take on a new significance. Pilots training at nearby airfields, such as those near Tonopah and Indian Springs, began describing unusual luminous objects during their night flights. Some assumed they were seeing new types of aircraft, perhaps advanced prototypes from the Army Air Corps or experimental bombers tested in secrecy. Others were less certain. The objects they saw were often spherical, pulsing softly, and capable of accelerating at impossible speeds. There were no sounds of engines, no contrails, and no clear direction of travel. A pilot from Nellis Airfield wrote in 1945 of a bright orange sphere that flew parallel to his P-51 for nearly 2 minutes before vanishing without a trace. Military intelligence logged the report but offered no explanation. Even civilians began noticing more of these lights during the post-war years. Ranchers tending livestock in remote valleys recounted seeing objects move across the sky that weren't planes or meteors. A 1948 report from a family traveling along Highway 6 described a line of glowing discs that appeared suddenly over the mountains, hovering in perfect formation before shooting upward and disappearing in less than a second. Witnesses were often reluctant to speak publicly, fearing ridicule, yet their stories echoed the same patterns. Hovering lights, silence, precision, and impossible acceleration. As the years went on, these sightings became woven into the local consciousness. In small desert towns, people began referring to them simply as the lights. Children heard stories from their grandparents about the glowing watchers, while older generations spoke of omens or signs. A quiet sense of unease mixed with fascination spread through rural Nevada, a feeling that the desert was not as empty as it seemed. It's important to understand the environment in which these stories emerged. The Nevada desert is vast, hundreds of miles of open land where distances distort perception. Light behaves differently here. The air, thin and dry, can bend and magnify brightness in strange ways. Under the right conditions, a plane's navigation lights can appear to hang motionless, and distant car headlights can shimmer like floating orbs. Scientists later noted that atmospheric inversion layers, common in desert nights, can refract light in ways that make it seem airborne or self-propelled. Yet even with all these natural explanations, not every account fit neatly into those boxes. Some of the earliest witnesses were trained observers, surveyors, pilots, and lawmen, people accustomed to judging distance and movement. Their reports contained a consistency and clarity that made them difficult to dismiss entirely. During the 1930s and 1940s, the federal government began expanding its testing grounds across Nevada. Small airstrips and radar installations dotted the state. In this period of technological experimentation, many assumed the lights must be part of secret military programs. Still, secrecy alone could not explain every detail. Pilots flying out of Las Vegas and Tonopah frequently reported luminous orbs moving in patterns inconsistent with aircraft. Some glowed bright white, others a deep amber. The objects often hovered, then accelerated without warning. When these reports were compared across different locations, patterns emerged that suggested something coordinated, perhaps intelligent. By the end of the 1940s, mystery lights had become an accepted part of Nevada's folklore. Newspapers ran small pieces describing them with casual intrigue, blending fact with speculation. Desert lights baffle ranchers, read one headline. Airmen report silent fireballs, read another. While most of these stories faded quickly from the public eye, they laid the foundation for a narrative that would soon explode into national consciousness. The idea that something unknown was moving through American skies. In these early decades, the lights were merely curiosities, unexplained but not yet threatening. They appeared, drifted, and disappeared again, leaving only questions in their wake. But as the Cold War dawned and the age of secrecy began, those questions would take on a far deeper weight. The skies over Nevada were about to become the most watched and most mysterious airspace in the world. It's easy now, from the comfort of a quiet room, to imagine those first observers staring into the night, lanterns dimming, fires burning low, and an unfamiliar glow rising on the horizon. The desert around them would have been utterly still, each man alone beneath 1,000 stars. They didn't have words like UFO or extraterrestrial. They simply saw what they saw, lights that did not belong. And as they watched them drift silently over the plains, they must have felt what so many have felt since, that peculiar mix of fear and wonder that only the unknown can bring. Those early sightings, scattered across forgotten reports and yellowed newspapers, marked the beginning of Nevada's most enduring mystery. The desert had begun to speak in lights, and though the world did not yet understand their language, the message was clear. Something was out there, and it had been for a very long time. By the early 1950s, the Nevada desert had transformed from a quiet frontier into a landscape pulsing with secrets. The world had changed, World War II was over, and a new tension filled the air, the Cold War. Across the globe, nations were racing to dominate the skies, and in the United States, that race began right here, above the same sands where miners once saw strange lanterns in the night. The endless emptiness of the Nevada desert made it perfect for secrecy. Far from the public eye, where even the stars seemed to guard their silence, the government carved out vast tracts of land for testing experimental aircraft and weapons. The skies that once hosted wandering lights were now home to projects cloaked in classified files and false explanations. In 1955, the U.S. Air Force quietly established what would become one of the most secretive locations in modern history, Groom Lake, better known today as Area 51. Officially, it was simply a testing and training range hidden within the vast boundaries of the Nevada Test and Training Range. But in truth, it was the birthplace of aircraft so advanced that even the engineers who worked on them sometimes struggled to comprehend their design. The U-2 spy plane, for example, could fly at altitudes no one had reached before, so high that ordinary radar barely detected it, and sunlight reflected off its surface in strange, shimmering ways. To anyone watching from the desert floor, the U-2 would have appeared as a glowing orb or a silver disk, moving silently and impossibly fast. For locals living in nearby towns, Rachel, Alamo, Tonopah, and the few scattered settlements within 100 miles, the skies suddenly began behaving strangely. People noticed lights moving in patterns unlike anything they had seen before. Bright objects appeared at dusk, gliding smoothly over the mountains, sometimes darting upward at sharp angles. Others hovered, silent and steady, before vanishing into thin air. Ranchers began reporting these sightings to the authorities, unaware that they were witnessing the testing of new aircraft such as the A-12 Oxcart and later, the State Route 71 Blackbird, both designed under absolute secrecy by the CIA's Skunk Works division. These planes, made of titanium and designed to travel at speeds beyond Mach 3, reflected sunlight in such a way that their movements often seemed to defy physics. Yet secrecy came at a cost. The government's refusal to acknowledge Area 51's existence, coupled with the bizarre aerial phenomena seen overhead, created an atmosphere ripe for speculation. When residents called nearby airbases to report the lights, officials routinely denied any operations were taking place. Radar controllers were told not to log high-altitude blips. Pilots who saw something unusual were instructed to say nothing. To the public, this silence sounded like confirmation that something extraordinary was happening, and perhaps not all of it was human-made. By the late 1950s, local law enforcement offices across southern Nevada and northern Arizona began receiving a growing number of reports describing glowing disks, metallic cylinders, and fiery triangles flying at extreme speeds. Some of these came from credible witnesses, commercial pilots, police officers, even scientists working at nearby test ranges. But with every official denial, the mystery deepened. Newspapers occasionally published brief, cryptic stories. Air Force denies unusual activity over desert, or locals spot strange lights again near Groom Lake. The lack of answers made people fill the silence with their own explanations. Were these experimental aircraft? Soviet spies? Or something far beyond human understanding? Inside the military, however, confusion also reigned. Even those with clearance didn't always know what was being tested in neighboring programs. A radar technician at Nellis Air Force Base recalled seeing objects move in ways that didn't match any known aircraft, accelerating from stationary to thousands of miles per hour. When he reported the incidents, he was told simply, "That's need to know." And you don't need to know. The compartmentalization of classified projects blurred the lines between genuine unknowns and human innovation. This deliberate ambiguity was not accidental. It was part of a strategy to keep prying eyes, especially Soviet intelligence, uncertain of what the U.S. was capable of. Meanwhile, across the desert, local culture began to shift. Stories of flying saucers became dinner-table conversations. Sightings near the Nevada test site coincided with nuclear detonations, leading some to wonder whether these lights were monitoring human activity or reacting to it. Radio shows began airing call-ins from frightened travelers describing encounters with luminous shapes following their cars at night. Truck drivers along Highway 375, long before it was dubbed the extraterrestrial highway, told of seeing brilliant white objects pacing them for miles before veering off into the darkness. As the 1960s approached, the combination of classified technology and public fascination reached its peak. The U-2 and A-12 programs had spawned countless UFO reports, so many that the Air Force eventually had to address them through Project Blue Book, the official investigation into unidentified flying objects. Though Project Blue Book often attributed sightings to natural causes or experimental aircraft, many of the files from Nevada remained open-ended, insufficient data. Even within government circles, There was acknowledgement that not everything could be explained away so easily. Declassified documents released decades later confirmed what many had suspected. Military officials actively encouraged confusion. When witnesses described seeing unfamiliar aircraft, they were quietly told they might have seen weather balloons or astronomical phenomena. Such explanations became standard cover stories, repeated so often that they became folklore themselves. But these explanations didn't erase the experiences of those who had seen something they couldn't explain. In truth, the Cold War skies were a theater of deception. The lights that mesmerized ranchers and travelers were often glimpses of machines born from human ambition, the desire to reach higher, faster, and farther than ever before. Yet amid these man-made wonders, there were still sightings that didn't fit the profile, objects moving without sound, without heat, and without any trace of propulsion. Military pilots occasionally encountered them during test flights and filed quiet reports that disappeared into classified vaults. Those were the encounters no one wanted to discuss publicly. And so, as the Cold War deepened, the Nevada desert became a paradox, a place where science and secrecy blurred into myth. On one hand, it was the cradle of America's most advanced engineering triumphs. On the other, it was the world's most persistent UFO hotspot. The two realities fed each other endlessly. The more the government hid, the more the public imagined. The more the public imagined, the deeper the government buried its truths. From the stillness of the desert floor, the sight must have been extraordinary. A silver flash cutting through the night, moving faster than sound yet silent as the wind. The stars reflecting off a sleek, impossible shape. For the people who watched from the edges of their ranches or from lonely highways, those moments felt like contact with something beyond understanding. And as the years passed, one thing became certain. In Nevada's skies, secrecy was no longer a shadow cast by human invention alone. It had become something larger, something alive. The desert that once reflected only starlight now carried the glow of mystery itself. Through the 1960s and 1970s, the mysterious lights over the Nevada desert became more than rumors. They became encounters. Unlike the fleeting, distant glows seen by miners or pilots in earlier decades, these sightings often unfolded up close, witnessed by everyday people who swore what they saw was real. The stories came from truck drivers hauling freight across the long, dark highways, from police officers patrolling lonely desert roads, and from families camping beneath the open sky. Their accounts were detailed, emotional, and oddly consistent. Something was happening out there in the emptiness, something that watched, hovered, and disappeared without a trace. One of the earliest and most widely discussed reports came from a group of long-haul drivers traveling between Tonopah and Ely in 1963. According to their statements, a cluster of bright white orbs appeared above the mountains to the north, moving in perfect formation. The lights followed their convoy for nearly 10 miles, maintaining altitude and speed, before suddenly splitting apart, each orb shooting off in a different direction, vanishing into the stars. When the drivers stopped at a diner to talk about it, they discovered that other travelers had seen the same thing that night. Newspaper archives from the following week carried a short note: mysterious lights reported over central Nevada. No explanation was ever given. Similar reports began appearing across the state throughout the decade. Residents of small towns like Alamo, Caliente, and Beatty described glowing spheres that hovered just above the desert floor, often changing color from blue to red to white. Ranchers claimed their livestock behaved strangely during these events, cattle refusing to move, dogs howling uncontrollably. Some witnesses reported that car engines stalled when the lights drew near, only to restart after the objects disappeared. Local law enforcement took these stories seriously enough to log them in their nightly reports, though few ever reached the newspapers. In 1967, a particularly well-documented incident occurred near the town of Pahrump. A state trooper named John Edmonds was driving along Highway 160 when he saw what he first assumed was a small plane descending too quickly. But as he watched, he realized the object had no wings, no sound, and emitted a steady, pulsating glow. It hovered just above the desert scrub before rising vertically and vanishing in seconds. Edmonds radioed his observation, and 2 other officers reported seeing the same object from miles away. The official report described it as an unidentified aerial light source with no observed aircraft characteristics. That phrasing, unidentified aerial, would quietly enter the lexicon years before UFO became a mainstream term. Psychologists studying mass sightings later noted how environment and emotion could shape what people perceived. The desert, they explained, creates a unique psychological effect. Its vastness, silence, and distance from human activity can make any anomaly seem magnified, almost spiritual. Under fatigue, isolation, or stress, the mind may misinterpret natural phenomena, bright stars, meteors, or atmospheric reflections, as intelligent movement. Yet in many of Nevada's reports, the witnesses weren't lone travelers or sleep-deprived dreamers. They were groups, sometimes dozens of people, watching the same event from different vantage points. Their descriptions often matched in precise detail: the color, the shape, the motion. If it was imagination, it was collective, synchronized, and strangely consistent. As the number of encounters grew, so too did their complexity. People began reporting interactions rather than mere observations. A family driving near Groom Lake in 1972 claimed that a glowing object followed their car for nearly half an hour, keeping perfect pace as they accelerated and slowed. When they stopped, it stopped. When they turned off the engine, the object dimmed until it was nearly invisible. They described an eerie stillness, no sound, no wind, just the faint hum of static on their radio. The object eventually lifted silently and sped toward the horizon. Their story spread quietly through nearby towns, becoming one of many tales that blurred the line between fear and fascination. Law enforcement officers were not immune to such experiences. One of the most famous local cases came from 1974, when multiple deputies in Lincoln County reported chasing a set of bright orange lights along Highway 375. The objects moved erratically, zigzagging through the sky before descending to within a few hundred feet of the ground. The deputies pursued them for over 20 minutes until the lights suddenly rose and disappeared. Radar from Nellis Air Force Base reportedly picked up unidentified activity that same night, though no official statement was made. For the officers involved, the experience was transformative. Several later admitted that, while they were trained to remain logical and skeptical, they couldn't explain what they'd witnessed, only that it was real and unlike anything they had ever seen. The 1970s also marked the beginning of a cultural shift. As reports multiplied, so did theories. UFO clubs, amateur investigators, and independent researchers began arriving in Nevada, camping out with telescopes and tape recorders, hoping to capture evidence of the desert lights. Some brought scientific instruments, others brought open minds and campfire stories. These gatherings were quiet, almost ritualistic, people staring into the dark, waiting for something extraordinary to break the horizon. The lights did not always appear, but when they did, witnesses described feeling both awe and calm, as though the desert itself were revealing a secret to those patient enough to listen. What made these civilian encounters so haunting was not just what people saw, but how they felt. Many described a deep sense of being observed, as though the lights were aware of their presence. A few even spoke of an unshakable emotion, not fear exactly, but an overwhelming quietness, a feeling of smallness beneath something vast and intelligent. Psychologists have a name for this sensation, the numinous experience, a moment when the ordinary world seems to touch something beyond human comprehension. Whether these encounters were real or imagined, they left emotional imprints that lasted for years. Through this period, the official stance of the U.S. government remained largely dismissive. Air Force spokesmen frequently attributed sightings to aircraft tests, meteorological phenomena, or optical illusions. Yet for those who lived in Nevada's rural towns, such explanations felt hollow. They knew the difference between an airplane and something that hovered silently without visible structure. They'd seen flares, weather balloons, and shooting stars, and what they described was none of those. By the late 1970s, Nevada had become synonymous with mystery. Its quiet highways and wide skies held a reputation that drew both skeptics and believers. Truckers exchanged stories at roadside diners. Travelers kept cameras ready, scanning the horizon at dusk. And amid all this, the lights continued to appear, unannounced, unexplained, and indifferent to human interpretation. These civilian encounters gave the phenomenon a soul, a human heartbeat. They weren't the reports of military pilots or scientists but of ordinary people, people who stumbled upon the extraordinary while simply trying to live their lives. They didn't ask to see what they saw. They simply looked up, and the universe looked back. And in those years, the mystery deepened. The lights over the Nevada desert were no longer whispers in the dark. They were experiences shared by hundreds, layered with emotion, skepticism, and wonder. Something had taken residence in the skies, and though no one could say what it was, everyone agreed on one thing. Once you'd seen them, you never looked at the night sky the same way again. As the 1980s dawned, the strange lights and stories circling Nevada's remote skies began to intersect with something even more mysterious, the growing shadow of government secrecy. The rumors that had once drifted through truck stops and campfires started to converge around one name, a place whispered more than spoken, known only to a few by its coordinates. Hidden deep within the dry heart of the desert, surrounded by mountains and barbed wire, it was called Groom Lake. The world would come to know it by another name, Area 51. At first, the name didn't carry the weight of legend. It appeared in obscure government documents and maps from the 1950s, labeled simply as a testing range within the Nevada desert. Few outside the military paid attention. But as civilian sightings grew more frequent through the 1970s and 80s, especially near the restricted airspace, patterns began to emerge. People noticed that the mysterious lights often appeared in the same regions marked as no-fly zones or near airfields that didn't officially exist. Some speculated that these weren't alien craft at all, but secret military prototypes being tested under the cover of darkness. Others believed the truth ran deeper, that what was being tested wasn't human technology at all. The earliest public hints about Groom Lake came from aviation enthusiasts scanning satellite maps and military flight paths. They noticed a large dry lakebed northwest of Las Vegas, bordered by mountains that formed a natural barrier. The land was part of the Nevada Test and Training Range, a massive stretch of desert used for nuclear testing and advanced aircraft development. Yet Groom Lake was different. It was marked, restricted, and air traffic was prohibited over it. No one could approach by land or air without clearance. Those who tried were met by security forces known as camo dudes, faceless guards dressed in desert camouflage, often driving unmarked white trucks. They didn't speak. They simply appeared, always watching from the hills. Locals from the nearby town of Rachel, a small settlement along what would later be called the extraterrestrial highway, spoke of seeing strange objects rising silently from the mountains at night. Some described glowing discs that ascended vertically before streaking off at impossible speeds. Others reported triangular craft that emitted no sound but pulsed with white and red light. The sightings were frequent enough that Rachel's residents stopped being surprised. They just accepted that the desert around them behaved differently. By the mid-1980s, rumors about the base had begun circulating in aviation circles. Test pilots, engineers, and defense contractors occasionally spoke in hushed tones about a facility where black projects were developed. Experimental aircraft so advanced that their existence was classified even within the military. The U-2 reconnaissance plane, the State Route 71 Blackbird, and later the stealth fighter programs were all linked to Groom Lake. These aircraft, designed to evade radar and fly higher than any commercial plane, could easily be mistaken for UFOs under certain lighting conditions. For skeptics, This explanation seemed satisfying. But for others, it didn't fit the details. The sharp turns, sudden accelerations, and eerie silence reported by witnesses didn't match even the most advanced jet capabilities of the time. Then, in 1989, everything changed. A man named Bob Lazar appeared in a televised interview with investigative reporter George Knapp on Las Vegas Class TV. With his face shadowed and his voice disguised, Lazar claimed to have worked at a site called S4, a secret facility near Area 51. He said that while employed there, he had seen and helped study 9 extraterrestrial craft stored in hangars built into the mountainside. According to Lazar, these craft were powered by a reactor that used a mysterious element he called Element 115, capable of manipulating gravity itself. He claimed the government was trying to reverse engineer alien technology. Lazar's story spread like wildfire. Overnight, Area 51 transformed from a military secret into a cultural phenomenon. His descriptions, the hangars, the security, the gravity-powered discs, captured the public imagination. Skeptics called him a fraud, pointing out the lack of verifiable employment records and the scientific implausibility of his claims. Yet there was something in his demeanor, calm, consistent, and oddly unshakable, that made people listen. And perhaps most compelling of all, the government refused to confirm or deny his statements. For the first time, the name Area 51 became synonymous with UFOs. The desert base, once invisible on maps, became a symbol of the unknown. Television crews arrived in Nevada. Documentaries aired. Books were written. Pilgrims, believers, skeptics, and dreamers began traveling to the outskirts of the restricted zone, setting up lawn chairs and telescopes on the ridge of Tikaboo Peak, the only legal vantage point from which the base could be glimpsed. At night, they would watch the skies, waiting for the sudden appearance of lights moving in ways that defied logic. The U.S. government maintained strict silence. Officially, Area 51 didn't exist. There were no records, no acknowledgments, no budget lines that named it. Yet, strange details emerged: supply trucks traveling under cover of darkness, planes known as Janet flights ferrying employees from Las Vegas, and the construction of new hangars visible from space. Those who worked nearby described the eerie quiet of the area, a silence so total that it felt deliberate, as if the land itself were concealing its purpose. Lazar's claims might have faded into urban legend if not for one key event. In the early 1990s, declassified documents revealed that Area 51 had indeed been used for the testing of secret aircraft, including the U-2 and the F-117 stealth fighter. The government's admission, after decades of denial, reignited public suspicion. If Area 51 had existed all along, what else might be hidden there? For many, the timing was too convenient. Lazar's descriptions of the base's layout, flight schedules, and the security systems matched what later whistleblowers and satellite images confirmed. Even those who doubted his alien technology story began to wonder whether he had, at the very least, worked somewhere within that shadowy network. Meanwhile, the sightings continued. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, campers and amateur observers recorded footage of glowing orbs and darting lights over the Groom Mountains. Some appeared to move in perfect silence, others made a faint, low hum. The footage was grainy but captivating, fueling debates in UFO research circles and late-night radio shows. As Area 51's legend grew, so did its mythology. The base became the centerpiece of countless theories: crashed saucers from Roswell stored in hidden vaults, alien autopsies conducted in underground chambers, secret collaborations between humans and extraterrestrial beings. The truth, buried under layers of speculation and denial, became nearly impossible to separate from fiction. But one fact remained: something extraordinary was happening in that desert, and someone wanted it kept secret. By the end of the decade, Nevada had become the epicenter of the world's UFO fascination. Tourists flocked to the newly renamed Extraterrestrial Highway, posing for photos beside green alien signs. Local diners offered alien burgers, and gift shops sold Area 51 surveillance team hats. Yet beneath the humor and commercialization, the air carried a quiet seriousness, a shared understanding that the desert's silence concealed truths no one was ready to face. The 1980s were not just a time of sightings and secrecy, they were the decade when the hidden and the human collided. What began as flickering lights over the desert evolved into a national mystery, tethered to the idea that somewhere out there, behind the mountains, behind the wire, humanity was standing on the edge of a revelation it could barely comprehend. In the months and years following the aerial school incident, the story began to ripple far beyond the borders of Zimbabwe. At first, it remained a local curiosity, covered by small newspapers and radio programs that treated it as a fascinating but isolated mystery. Yet soon, the account of 60 African children witnessing otherworldly beings caught the attention of international media. This was the mid-1990s, a time before social media, when stories still spread slowly through print, television, and word of mouth. But even so, this one carried a strange momentum. It resonated with people in a way few UFO encounters had before, partly because of the innocence of the witnesses, and partly because their testimonies felt unfiltered, untouched by the kind of adult interpretation that often colors such events. News outlets from the BBC, CNN, and Reuters began sending journalists to Rua. Among the earliest and most significant reports came from the BBC's Tim Leach, a correspondent based in Zimbabwe at the time. When Leach first heard about the story, he was skeptical. He had covered war, famine, and political unrest, and he didn't expect to find credibility in tales of aliens visiting a schoolyard. Yet when he arrived at the aerial school and interviewed the children himself, something in their sincerity unsettled him. In his dispatch, Leach described their accounts as one of the most astonishing stories I've ever covered. The children did not contradict each other, did not embellish, and did not display the signs of collective fantasy or hysteria. They spoke with a quiet conviction that defied easy dismissal. Soon, major television networks produced short features about the event, airing clips of the children describing the beings they saw. These broadcasts reached millions. In the footage, the children spoke earnestly. They were standing by the trees. They had big black eyes. They didn't say anything, but I felt something in my mind. The simplicity of their words made the story even more haunting. Viewers around the world found themselves leaning forward, listening not as if to a ghost tale, but to a testimony, something that felt oddly plausible because it was so unadorned. For many who watched, the story stirred a quiet question. What if they really did see something? However, as the story spread, it also encountered the inevitable resistance of skepticism. Scientists, psychologists, and educators began to weigh in, offering rational explanations. Some argued that the event was a case of mass hysteria, a collective delusion sparked by suggestion. Others suggested that misinterpretation played a role, that perhaps the children saw a small aircraft, or even a local prank involving costumes, and their imaginations filled in the rest. Skeptics like Brian Dunning and Michael Shermer later analyzed the event, noting that eyewitness testimony, especially from children, is notoriously unreliable. They emphasized that without physical evidence, no photographs, no radar confirmation, no artifacts, the story remained anecdotal. And yet, even these rational voices could not fully dismiss what had happened. The consistency of the accounts, the emotional coherence, and the lack of motive for fabrication made the aerial case stubbornly difficult to debunk. Unlike other UFO reports, which often rely on a single adult witness or ambiguous video footage, this event was rooted in dozens of young testimonies collected independently within hours of the sighting. The children had no access to one another's stories before being interviewed, yet their drawings and descriptions matched with striking precision. Journalists who visited Rua years later often described a lingering unease. The locals remembered the event vividly. Teachers still spoke of how the children were terrified that day, and parents recalled how their sons and daughters refused to go outside at night for weeks afterward. Some of the children, now grown adults, continued to stand by their experiences. In later interviews, some conducted nearly 20 years after the event, they described the memory as still vivid, unchanged by time. "It wasn't imagination," one woman said softly. "We all saw it. You don't forget something like that." For the media, the aerial school encounter became a symbol of UFO credibility. It was not like the blurry lights caught on camera in Roswell or the fantastical abduction stories that filled tabloids. It was quiet, detailed, and consistent, an event that seemed to resist simplification. The fact that it occurred in Africa, far from the cultural centers of Western UFO mythology, also added a layer of intrigue. It suggested that these phenomena, whatever they were not confined to any particular culture or belief system. Governments, however, remained publicly silent. The Zimbabwean authorities never conducted an official investigation, though the case was known to local police. No government documents or classified reports have ever surfaced, suggesting that the event was largely treated as a curiosity rather than a potential threat. But within the broader UFO research community, whispers circulated that the South African Air Force and even international agencies such as the CIA might have taken private interest. At the time, South Africa was transitioning from apartheid, and global intelligence cooperation in the region was high. It was not inconceivable that Western agencies monitored the reports, especially given that similar sightings had been documented across southern Africa that same month. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, the aerial case maintained an odd status, too credible to ignore, too strange to explain. It appeared periodically in documentaries, each time reigniting public fascination. The footage of Dr. John Mack's interviews became central to these retellings, his calm voice and empathetic tone serving as a bridge between scientific curiosity and spiritual wonder. Mack himself often noted how media coverage tended to simplify the event, reducing it to a UFO sighting by schoolchildren, while ignoring the deeper psychological and existential dimensions he believed it represented. As the new millennium began, the mystery of the Nevada lights entered a new phase, one shaped by technology, skepticism, and a strange kind of faith. The Internet, still in its early rise during the late 1990s, had now become a vast network of voices, theories, and digital evidence. What was once whispered among small-town locals and late-night radio listeners now existed on message boards, forums, and emerging video platforms. For the first time, ordinary people could share footage, testimonies, and satellite images in real time. The mystery that had lived for decades in isolation under the desert sky had gone global. Hundreds of amateur skywatchers, armed with consumer-grade cameras, began documenting the night skies over Nevada. They camped along the edges of the restricted zone, near Tikabo Peak and Groom Lake Road, scanning the heavens with infrared lenses and digital zooms. Videos began to circulate online. Flickering lights, darting orbs, triangular silhouettes hovering motionless against the stars. Some were easily explained as aircraft or lens flares. Others, however, defied simple explanation. A few clips showed glowing objects accelerating at impossible speeds or making sudden, right-angled turns that no known aircraft could perform. To skeptics, they were tricks of light, atmospheric distortions, or edited footage. But to believers, they were proof, not only of something in the sky, but of something being hidden on the ground. It was during this time that new whistleblowers and former employees began to step forward. Some claimed to have worked on experimental propulsion systems at classified bases across Nevada. Others spoke of craft that appeared to bend light around themselves, or of underground facilities large enough to house entire fleets of vehicles unseen by the public. None could provide definitive proof, yet their stories shared eerie similarities, the same mention of intense security, compartmentalized research, and technology decades ahead of what was publicly known. Even within their contradictions, there was a common thread. The desert had become humanity's greatest laboratory of secrecy. In 2007, The conversation took another unexpected turn when a previously unknown Pentagon program came to light. Officially called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ADIP, it was a government-funded effort to study unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, the term now used instead of UFOs. Run quietly from 2007 to 2012, ADIP analyzed radar data, pilot testimonies, and video evidence of objects that seemed to defy known physics. The revelation came from none other than Luis Elizondo, a former intelligence officer who claimed the U.S. government had been taking these incidents far more seriously than they admitted publicly. Suddenly, the Nevada desert was no longer just the setting of rumors. It was potentially a focal point in a national investigation. Declassified videos released years later, showing U.S. Navy pilots tracking unidentified objects performing incredible maneuvers, reignited interest worldwide. While these encounters occurred far from Nevada, they carried echoes of the same mystery that had long defined the desert sky: movements beyond our understanding, technology beyond our reach, and silence from those who might know more. At the same time, modern researchers began re-examining old data with new tools. Using satellite imagery, they tracked changes in the terrain around Groom Lake, noting new construction, extended runways, and buried structures. Drone hobbyists attempted to capture aerial footage, though most found themselves intercepted or warned away by security long before reaching restricted airspace. The veil of secrecy around Area 51 hadn't lifted. If anything, it had become denser, adapting to the digital age. Meanwhile, the culture surrounding the mystery had evolved. What was once fringe had become mainstream curiosity. Documentaries on streaming platforms dissected every angle: government documents, witness testimonies, radar data, and psychological profiles. Yet the tone had changed from wild speculation to cautious investigation. Scientists, former military officials, and journalists began treating the topic with a seriousness that would have been unthinkable in previous decades. The taboo of discussing UFOs had faded. Even the Pentagon, in a rare display of transparency, released official statements acknowledging that unidentified objects were being observed, and that they did not match any known human technology. Still, for every fact revealed, new questions emerged. If these lights and objects were not extraterrestrial, then what were they? Advanced drones? Secret hypersonic aircraft? Experimental propulsion systems? Or were they something else? Something that operated according to principles our science had yet to understand? In the absence of clear answers, the mystery itself grew more profound. By the late 2010s, the Nevada desert had become both a symbol and a metaphor. It represented the limits of human knowledge, a reminder that even in an age of satellites, AI, and interplanetary probes, there were still corners of our own world that refused to yield their secrets. Tourists still traveled to Rachel, Nevada, and stood along the extraterrestrial highway, looking up into the same boundless sky that had inspired generations of dreamers. Some came hoping to see proof of life beyond Earth. Others came simply to feel small beneath the stars, to reconnect with the ancient sense of awe that once guided humanity's gaze upward. Then came 2019, the year of the Storm Area 51 movement. It began as a joke, a viral meme suggesting that people should simply rush the gates of the base to see them aliens. But as the event gained traction, tens of thousands expressed interest, and hundreds actually showed up in Nevada. What could have been chaos turned into a festival of curiosity, a gathering of believers, skeptics, and wanderers who came not to break in, but to celebrate the mystery itself. Music played, signs waved, and beneath the laughter there was an unspoken truth. Humanity had come to peace with its curiosity. The desire to know had become part of the story, part of who we are. Through all this, the desert remained unchanged. The winds still whispered across the dunes. The stars still flickered in the cool, endless sky. And somewhere, far out past the hills, the faint glow of strange lights could still be seen, drifting silently over the sands. Whether they belonged to experimental crafts, Advanced surveillance drones? Or something far older and wiser than humanity? No one could say. But maybe that was the point. The Nevada lights, once feared and misunderstood, had transcended the need for answers. They had become something else, a symbol of wonder in an age of certainty, a quiet reminder that mystery still exists, and that sometimes the unknown isn't meant to be solved, only experienced. As night falls over the desert once more, the sands glimmer faintly under the starlight, and the horizon stretches endlessly ahead. The air is still. The mind quiets. And for those who look long enough, patiently and without expectation, there it is again, a single light flickering in the distance. A reminder, steady and timeless, that even in a world where everything can be explained, the universe still keeps some secrets for itself. Night falls over the Nevada desert, wrapping the land in a deep, velvet stillness. The air grows cooler, and the wind drifts softly across the sand, carrying with it the faint scent of sage. Far away, beyond the distant ridges, a glow begins to rise, subtle at first, like the reflection of lightning behind clouds, but there are no clouds tonight. The stars burn sharp and unbroken. Then the glow shifts, pulsing once, twice, and forming into a steady light that hovers above the horizon. It moves with purpose, slow, deliberate, almost curious. Witnesses often describe the moment in the same way, a sensation before sight, as if the body senses something unusual before the mind can process it. The light is silent, yet it commands attention. It dances in the night sky, changing color from white to amber, then to a soft green that fades into silver. No sound of engines, no echo of wings. It moves in ways that defy logic, abrupt, precise, and smooth all at once. For those who see it, time seems to slow, as if the desert itself is holding its breath. When the light vanishes, the darkness feels deeper than before. Some who have witnessed it claim that moments afterward, their surroundings feel strangely charged, like static humming in the air. Others describe an overwhelming calm, as if the encounter quieted something restless within them. Scientists may call it illusion, pilots may call it classified, but for the few who have stood under that glowing sky, the experience feels sacred. The desert gives no explanations, only silence. And beneath that silence, a single truth seems to hum, that not everything above us can be measured, and not all mysteries seek to be solved. In the years that followed, the lights became more than sightings. They became a quiet pilgrimage. People began traveling from far away. Scientists, dreamers, skeptics, and wanderers, all drawn to the Nevada night. They came carrying cameras and notebooks, yet most left with only stories, each one slightly different but all threaded with the same awe. Around campfires and in roadside diners, the conversations always circled back to the same question. Why do the lights appear, and why here? Some say the desert itself calls them, its vast emptiness a mirror for what exists beyond our understanding. Those who have seen the lights speak softly of their encounters, describing emotions more than events. They talk about a sudden stillness, a quiet that feels alive, followed by a shimmer of light moving intelligently across the horizon. The experience feels deeply personal, as if the lights reveal themselves only to those who are truly watching. And once seen, the memory never fades. Years later, witnesses can recall every detail: the smell of the cool desert air, the sound of the wind, the exact color of the glow against the stars. Even those who never witness anything admit that the feeling of mystery is real. There's something about the Nevada desert, the silence, the isolation, that heightens the senses and opens the imagination. Perhaps the lights are reflections of that human longing to connect with the unknown. They remind us that despite all our progress, we are still explorers in a vast, unsolved universe. Whether these lights are secret craft, cosmic visitors, or natural wonders doesn't matter as much as what they represent: the fragile beauty of curiosity and the timeless comfort of wonder. As dawn nears, the stars begin to fade, and the desert transforms from shadow to gold. The air warms gently, and the night's mysteries retreat beyond the horizon. Those who stayed awake to watch the skies feel both satisfied and restless, as though they've glimpsed something extraordinary yet intangible. The Nevada lights, whether illusion or intelligence, leave behind a calm that lingers long after they disappear. It's the calm of knowing that some questions are meant to remain unanswered, their beauty existing in the not knowing. The desert has always guarded its secrets. It whispers them to the wind, hides them in the stillness, and shares them only with those patient enough to listen. Over the years, countless eyes have searched these skies. Soldiers, astronomers, believers, and skeptics, all seeking the same elusive truth. Yet every explanation seems to fall short, and the mystery endures. Perhaps that is what makes it timeless. The lights remind us that there is more to existence than what we can measure, more to the universe than the borders of our understanding. As the sun breaks over the ridge, painting the sands in pale fire, the night's questions soften into peace. The lights are gone, but their memory remains, not as fear, but as wonder. The people who come here carry that wonder back with them, quietly, like a secret blessing. And when night falls again, they will return, waiting beneath the endless sky. For in that vast, silent expanse, where stars burn and vanish with the rhythm of eternity, the Nevada desert will always hold its quiet promise, that the unknown is not to be feared, but cherished, as a reminder that we are still part of something infinite.